Hello students, today we will continue with the topic failures of land reforms. Now this is in continuation to the last video which was on the topic land reforms. So there I explained what were the land reforms, what all measures were implemented under land reforms, but this topic, subtopic to that previous video is still to be explained. So this is here we will see failures of land reforms. So as you see the points here, the first point, zamindars continued to own large areas of land. Now the land reforms aimed at abolition of zamindari system, but zamindars were capable of still possessing land because what they did is evicting tenants who were cultivating the lands. They removed them and claimed to be actual cultivators. So zamindars, due to their because they were powerful too, they were able to evict tenants and still remain as owners of land. Big landlords challenged the land ceiling legislation. Why? Because again, as the point that I just said, zamindars and the big landlords were powerful enough. They had huge resources at hand. They were powerful to challenge the legislations, and hence they tried delaying the implementation. Next point, Benami transfers of land in the name of relatives. Now, simply this point talks about that the landlords, the zamindars, indulged in malpractices, indulged in transferring lands in the name of relatives whom they claimed to be their relatives. So Benami word here suggests that such relatives who were non-existent. So Benami transfers took place, or even transfers in the name of close relatives also took place done by the zamindars in order to escape the land reforms, in order to keep possession of the lands. Lastly, sharecroppers and agricultural laborers did not benefit from land reforms. Why? Because these were the most marginalized class of the farming sector, where these laborers were not in the condition to afford lands, or they could not get possession of the lands which was redistributed by the government after the land reforms, when the land reforms were being implemented. So they were left out. Many of these were left out and could not get direct benefit from the land reform measures. So although there were certain failures of land reforms, although there were certain failures of land reforms, but still the land reforms was very successful in the states of Kerala and West Bengal, also because the governments of these states were using strict implementation of all the legislations that were done under land reforms. Although in the other states inequality still existed in the agricultural sector, where land reforms could not achieve much. But over the years, in course of time, land reforms have changed drastically the institutional structure of agricultural sector, that is the ownership of land, abolition of zamindars. Ownership of lands were given to the actual tillers, actual cultivators, and so land reforms was capable of transforming agricultural sector, and therefore these land reforms are termed as institutional changes because they brought about a change in the ownership pattern of agricultural land. And let us move ahead to the next topic we have to today, which is the new agricultural strategy, and therefore it it is studied under technical reforms. Why? Because you remember that in the beginning of the last video which was sent, we I had just explained that we are in the topic agrarian reforms, wherein there are three subcategories of reforms, in which there is technical reforms, land reforms which we just completed, and lastly general reforms. So technical reforms were brought about through the new agricultural strategy, which then led to green revolution. So what you are seeing here, the points, now you know that agricultural sector was very much backward and was not having any technological upgradation. As in the time of the Britishers, nothing was done to modernize the agricultural sector. It was only exploited at the hands of the Britishers. So the new agricultural strategy which came in the year 1960s it was started, it was implemented around the year 1960s. After the land reforms were implemented, because that was foremost, land reforms had to first bring about a change in the institutional structure, and then the government focused on implementing new agricultural strategy. So in order to upgrade the agricultural sector, to bring about a drastic change in the production of agricultural sector, the new agricultural strategy was brought about, more specifically in the year 1966, through a program which was called high yielding varieties program. As you can see here, under this high yielding varieties program, which made use of high yielding variety seeds, especially related to food grains which were wheat, bajra, rice, maize, etc. So these high yielding variety seeds were researched and produced by the scientists, and hence these were the seeds which could produce a manifold quantum of production of these crops production. So high yielding varieties program was introduced, but this was not enough. Only the use of high yielding variety seeds was not enough. In this program, use of chemical fertilizers and use of insecticides and pesticides was also required, along with the proper irrigation. So this new agricultural strategy talks about how technical reforms were brought in with the use of high yielding variety seeds, which these high yielding variety seeds are also therefore called miracle seeds, as the use of these seeds brings tremendous increase in crop production. So, and also with the use of chemical fertilizers, the use of chemical fertilizers started initially. Before, the farmers were dependent on traditional methods of using manure, but chemical fertilizers were introduced. Use of insecticides and pesticides were introduced for crop protection, because when the high yielding varieties are used, it has to be protected from the attack of pests. Hence use of insecticides and pesticides was also introduced. So you can see the points that is here. I'm not going into each and every detail, but as we have to just understand what were the technical reforms that were introduced. Also scientific farm practices were introduced in the farming sector, and mechanized means of cultivation was also introduced gradually. So mechanized means of cultivation means modern machines were started being used in the agricultural sector, as compared to the earlier ways of farming where traditional methods were used. Now the farmers were being encouraged to go for mechanized means of cultivation. And but also small farmers who were not able to afford were encouraged to, through various government measures, to buy agricultural implements, machines and tools, by providing them credit facilities under all these institutions, cooperative societies and regional rural banks, etc. So as you can see here, what we have just discussed is how technical reforms were in under the new agricultural strategy, which then brought about what is called green revolution. So as you see here, the two terms, green revolution, green, so it talks about a revolution in crop production, immense or manifold increase in crop production which happened in the year 1967 to 68. And due to this immense increase, nearly the food grain production increased to 25% as compared to before. So this was a very drastic change that happened in the agricultural sector. So we will now discuss about how the green revolution brought about changes, and it was implemented in a phased manner. It was implemented in two phases actually. And so before going to these, what is green revolution? Green revolution is a large increase in food grain production, as I said here. But to define it properly, green revolution means or refers to a large increase in the production of food grains resulting from a package of inputs which includes high yielding variety seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, and regular supply of water, that is irrigation. So this is what green revolution is defined as. So moving ahead to the topic of green revolution, which was introduced in a phased manner, that is in phase 1, when it was largely introduced or implemented for mainly for wheat and rice crops, and in those regions which were more agriculturally rich or were producing wheat and rice. So these regions or these states were known for wheat and rice production, and hence the green revolution was first seen as being successful in these areas or these states only. But after the phase 1, which started in the mid 60s and continued till 70s, after that in phase 2, green revolution also spread across other states and areas and also was extended to other crops as well. So as you can see here, that green revolution was therefore then extended to the entire country of India, the whole of India, and what all benefits that green revolution brought about, what were the success uh, of what was the success of green revolution, that is what we will see in the following points. So these are the achievements of green revolution. So the very first point, spurt in crop productivity, or we can say increase in crop productivity. So as it was mentioned earlier also, that due to green revolution there was a large increase in crop production. So there are some figures given here, but the main point briefly states that in the food grains sector, in the food grains, rice, wheat, maize, especially rice and wheat, and then maize, jowar, bajra, to name a few, there was a large increase in the production of these food grains. Next, what happened in under the green revolution was that the area under cultivation, that is, was also increased because of the use of chemical fertilizers and the other um, measures that were also introduced under green revolution. So because of the use of chemical fertilizers, more area could be brought under the cultivation of these crops. Why? Because the chemical fertilizers could easily be used to keep the fertility of the soil at a maintained level. So because the farmers were used to practice fallowing, as it is said here, chemical fertilizers eliminated the need for fallowing. Fallowing was a practice by the farmers to leave the land uncultivated so that it could regain its fertility. So chemical fertilizers and the use of insecticides, pesticides, all promoted more area to be brought under cultivation, and hence you can see here that green revolution helped in achieving all these goals. Thirdly, shift from subsistence to commercialization, shift from subsistence farming to commercial farming. So traditionally the farmers were engaged mainly in producing crops for only own use or own consumption, which was called subsistence farming. This point has been discussed earlier in the previous topics also. So subsistence farming was then slowly, gradually, it shifted to commercial farming when the farmers realized, due to the green revolution and its success that it was achieving in crop production, that they could understand that farming was not only for own production, but a surplus could be attained and which could be sold in the market for an income. So the farmers gradually shifted to commercialization, and so therefore this led to marketable surplus. Marketable surplus is the surplus that is left after the own consumption of the farmers. So it is this surplus can then be sold in the market, and hence it promotes agriculture as a commercial sector. So when uh, before independence and before the pre-British period also. In the pre-British period, the farmers were used to cultivate in a traditional manner where they produced mainly for own consumption. So as you see this point here, that brought about a shift in agriculture. So from this point, fourth point also follows, is that the farmers outlook towards agriculture, towards farming, changed as now they adopted commercialization, and farming was no longer a source of subsistence. Now, the very main point, that food grain production brought self sufficiency for the country. Food grain production brought self sufficiency for the country, and as green revolution was able to achieve manifold increase in the production of food grain crops, mainly wheat, rice, maize, on which most people are dependent, because it is the basic food essentials for everyone. So self sufficiency was attained in the food grains sector, and because of that the food shortage in the country was removed, and the prices of food grains fell, so many people who could not afford, the lower sections could afford. So it had many positive benefits, self sufficiency, when it was attained in the food grain production. There were many positive benefits. Also, the government was able to maintain buffer stocks. This term says that buffer stocks are the surplus food grains which are then kept as stocks. It is taken by the government from the farmers and kept as stocks, which could be then used at times of shortage. So here what we have seen are the achievements of green revolution. So what we have seen is the achievements of green revolution. But even in spite of the achievements of green revolution, there was certain drawbacks of green revolution, some limitations attached to green revolution. Even though we cannot ignore what changes that had happened under the green revolution, and under all of the reforms that were taken under the agriculture. So it was because of all the reforms, technical, institutional, general reforms, that there was a substantial rise in crop production, and as well as productivity also increased. So it was owing to mainly to green revolution that India could see a changed face of agricultural sector. But as I said, there were certain limitations of green revolution, and it was because of the fact also that the production and productivity of our country in terms of wheat, rice, and other crops was less compared to the developed economies of China, UK, or America. So we will just see the important limitations of the green revolution. Firstly, green revolution was limited to a few crops, as earlier in this topic of green revolution it was pointed out that it was started in the first phase, it benefited certain areas, and it was introduced to few crops, that is wheat, rice, and some other food grains, and so its scope could not spread to other crops, that is jute, cotton, tea, etc. And so uh, the the area of crop production to which green revolution was introduced was limited. The crops were mainly the food grain crops. The commercial crops were not under the coverage of green revolution. So we are just talking about the time period 1950 to 1990. Just remember that. So in this time period, substantial increase was achieved in the area of food grains, not in the other crops as well. That is the other crops such as pulses or commercial crops. But it was mainly, it was also important here, it should be mentioned that India's main focus was, as the government wanted a food sufficient economy, so that was achieved, but still this limitation or drawback remains, that it could not extend to the other crops as well, and there was an uneven spread, or we can say this is regional disparity in the application of green revolution. Mainly the agricultural states, the affluent states like Punjab, Haryana, the names are mentioned here, Tamil Nadu. These were the agricultural states where most farmers were able to adapt to the new strategy of agriculture, and hence more remarkable significant impact of green revolution was seen here rather than in the other states. The other states which were a little backward as compared to agricultural production, they could not, or there were more small or marginal farmers in these states, so they were not able to adapt to the green revolution very quickly, and hence they were lagging behind. So here the impact of green revolution was not significant. So, but still, nevertheless, green revolution in the course of time spread to other regions and sectors, states as well, and so the achievements of green revolution cannot be uh, ignored. But the third point here, limited farming population. So we have seen limited, it was limited to few crops, it was limited to a few states which were more agriculturally rich, and it was also limited to the big farmers, that is the small and marginal farmers who were the bulk of the farming population could not gain much because they could not acquire the expensive inputs which were beyond their reach. And so the big farmers were the ones who benefited more from this green revolution, as they could easily adapt to the new techniques or technical reforms. So these points make it clear here that the application of green revolution or success of green revolution was limited on account of these reasons. So we come to the last point or last limitation of green revolution. So the last point here says that the economic divide or the economic inequality between the farmers, the big and the small farmers, increased. So you can see here the gulf between the rich and the poor farmers has increased, has widened over time because of the green revolution. Why? Because, as the previous points have suggested in the limitations, that the benefits of green revolution was reaped more by the rich farmers, more by the rich farmers, you can see here also. And so the poor farmers were more, most of them were left out, they could not adapt to the new technology. So because of this, poverty and indebtedness also was there, it was widespread, and even though loan waivers were offered, still farmers were in a desperate state. So you see that economic divide, this point suggests that the income inequality between the rich and the poor farmers has increased in that time period. So what we understand here from all these points is that even though green revolution was a significant effort from the government to change the agricultural sector's production and to increase agricultural sector's production, still there are certain challenges that still remain, especially this point that there is a gulf between the haves and have nots. But so we come here to the end of this topic, to this part of the topic where we have discussed about green revolution.